Hey everyone, welcome to the Freedom to Flourish podcast. Your co-host here, Dr. Joel Miller, here with Dr. Tim Augustiniak. In today's episode, we're talking about falling asleep. If you can't fall asleep, it takes a long time for you to fall asleep, 20 minutes, an hour, 2 hours to fall asleep. This episode is for you. We're going to talk about all the different components that go into falling asleep. It's not as simple as just taking melatonin, and you probably shouldn't even do that. So we'll get into all this fun stuff. Dr. Tim, good morning, sir. How are you?
I am doing absolutely wonderful. It's good to be here. We took a week off last week. We were out of town on a baby moon. So for our listeners who are like, what the heck is that? It is the equivalent of a honeymoon before you have a baby. So my wife is 27 weeks pregnant this week. So we scheduled a trip before things got too uncomfortable for her. And we went to Cancun last week. So we were gone. It was kind of funny though, because you had texted me, I think it was Monday night. And we always text and say, oh, podcast tomorrow. And the day of the week that we do things, it'll tend to fluctuate sometimes because of just schedule and things that we have going on. And I was
Yep.
like, oh, yeah, I forgot to let you know we're in Mexico. You're like, oh, okay. Let's just
Yeah.
take the week off then. So,
Yeah. It's awesome.
anyway, just back from that, and so just excited to get back to things and get back in the groove. So, should be a
Love
good
it.
episode.
Love it.
Um, with
So,
the episode being called, can't fall asleep. If you can't fall asleep, stop it. Get some help.
oh my word.
Our longtime listeners should probably remember that episode. What was that called? Stop doing these
Um,
things,
yeah.
something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. It
Um,
was kind of an episode going over like the different, just the things that worsen people's health. That's so common these days. Like, hey, if you cut these things out, if you stop these different things, usually your health will improve significantly. Yeah.
yeah. So let this be the episode of getting some help. So there's a lot of different things that'll contribute to sleep issues, and falling asleep in particular is a bigger problem than I think people realize. Those who sleep well don't tend to even think about it. And I feel like people don't talk maybe about their sleep just with general random people as much as we hear it in the office. I would argue that, at least a quarter to a half of the patients that I have some degree of sleep issues,
Yeah.
where they're not falling asleep well, or they're waking up throughout the night a couple times to use the bathroom, or they get anxious and their mind starts racing, or they're just uncomfortable and pain. There's a lot of different things that'll contribute, and it's super common. It is
Yeah.
super, super common. So in this episode, we're going to try to encompass a lot, all of the causes that we can think of that actually make sense to our listeners and are practical, and things that you can start to work on yourselves, but also at the same time, things that you can help yourself by gathering some data and maybe seek out a practitioner near you that can help you work through maybe some infections or detox issues or gut issues or neurotransmitter issues, you name it. So it's going to be a good one. I know we started a little bit of a list here, but we kind of started with, a couple different categories of sleep issues. Just like I just kind of rambled through real quick there. A lot of times people are going to have disruptions. As a whole, you're going to have some sort of disruption of your circadian rhythm. And so your circadian rhythm is your sleep-wake cycle. It's regulated by, hormones like melatonin, cortisol, things like that, adenosine. And it's all really driven by your pineal gland. So your pineal gland sits kind of further back in your brain, way behind your eyes, and it will sense blue light. So when the sun comes up and you detect blue light frequencies, it's going to wake you up. When that starts to go away and you don't really detect as much light, it tells the body, hey, now it is time to go to sleep. Well, other hormones can mess that up. If you don't make enough, say, melatonin because serotonin isn't produced properly in the gut,
Mhm.
that can throw things off. If you have too many stress hormones and adrenal issues, that can throw things off. If you have, say, like frequent urination and not enough hormone production to regulate that whole process, that can throw things off. So the main categories that I at least listed on here was pain driven. So if you're in pain and driving stress, all that can throw things off. One, you're just uncomfortable and won't be able to fall asleep. And
Right.
two, there is the hormone side of it. Adrenal issues, genitourinary issues, and then neurotransmitter dysfunction. Dr. Joel, is there anything that you would break down more specifically about that list, or do you think that covers?
I think that's a great list. Yeah, I think that's a great list. And the main ways that I'd probably organize in my mind is, number one, understanding, like, obviously there's the sleep hygiene part of, like, how are you getting ready for bed, and is your body's circadian rhythm, are you properly handling that, so that your body knows that it's actually time to go to bed. And then we get into some more of the in-depth stuff. The hygiene, I feel like, is kind of more superficial stuff. So the in-depth stuff goes back to more of like the chemistry, like we're talking about. So obviously have the pain component, but then talking about like adrenal issues. One of the biggest things that I'll find is this hormone GABA, this neurotransmitter GABA, that helps with calming your brain. So if you have low GABA levels, generally your brain tends to be more like escalated, in a sense, more hyperactive, to where you might lay down and instead of being very relaxed and falling asleep, your mind is just running all the time. People that have low GABA tend to have a lot of anxiety as well, because again, their nervous system is kind of up escalated, if you will. So I find GABA issues, and of course we talk about how this toxin called ammonia that comes off of parasites and bacteria and different infections that can cause issues. And so we see a lot of issues with the gut, which we talk about, of course, all the time. So we can get into that a little bit more in depth. Dr. Tim, let's go kind of piece by piece through these things, and we can kind of elaborate where we need to, and then kind of move on to the next one. So we talked about the pain piece. I think that one's fairly straightforward. If you are in pain, you know how it's going to be really hard to fall asleep. And so to me, that kind of stimulates another question, which is like, hey, what's the best position for sleep? And it's kind of a question that people ask all the time. And there's always different answers with things. In my experience, I think this answer makes the most sense. And that is, it depends on your body and your chemistry. And the reason I say that is because for some people, based on what's going on in their body and with their health, they tend to be most comfortable laying on their left side. And in some other people's experience, they're most comfortable laying on their back. In my experience, as I grew up, I would always fall asleep laying on my stomach with my face turned to the right. And then I would wake up with my face turned to the left. That was the only way I could sleep. And then I started going through my own health journey. Started getting rid of parasites, started healing the gut, started detoxing better. And what I noticed was, and to this day, I sleep best on my back. I can sleep in any position, but my back is most comfortable. And I stay there while I sleep. I don't really move around a lot. And so the whole sleep position, I think, is really dependent on your body and your health. So if you feel most comfortable in a certain position, for some reason, that's just what your body likes, sleep in that position. But also realize that if you wake up, this is a little bit of a side note here, but if you wake up with pain, if you wake up with a kink in your neck, for example, could it be your bed or pillow? I mean, those things, if they're really worn out and stuff like that, there could be a factor there. But in my experience, if you wake up and something's all tight, that goes actually back to like internal inflammation, to where you ate something bad the night before, or maybe several days before, you haven't been eating well, and you just kind of wake up with that inflammation. A lot of times it goes back to what we put in our body. So little side note there, but that's kind of my 2 cents there on the pain and the position of what position should we sleep in. Do you have any thoughts to add to that, Dr. Tim?
Not a whole lot, other than if something hurts, not going to sleep well in that position. You
Sure.
might wake up and things hurt, but falling asleep can be difficult, obviously, if things hurt. But I forget exactly where I heard this, but pay attention to the position that you wake up in. Because a lot of times people will find their most comfortable position in the position that their body likes the most while they're asleep, and they won't realize it. And the only indicator of that is waking up in a certain position. And I'm not saying like, halfway wake up, roll over, and then that's your position. No, it's like from going from completely knocked out sleep, waking up a little bit and being aware of like where you're at in space, that's the position that could be very, very helpful to help you fall asleep. And so if you find that you toss and turn, and you finally get to sleep and you wake up, that could be a position that might expedite the process for falling asleep. Because our listeners today are not going to be, listening to this just for, quick little tips if they don't have a problem. They might listen because they're interested, but a lot of people are going to click on this because they have problems. And so the strategies to fix this, I think, are going to be really important to talk about. And so one strategy is just identify what position you're waking up in, take note of that, and try to end up in that or start sleeping in that position to start the night and see if that makes falling asleep easier.
Yep, love it. All right, Dr. Tim, let's jump into adrenal issues. What are some of your thoughts on how what do you mean when you say adrenal issues and kind of how that impacts sleep and being able to fall asleep?
Yep, so anytime you have adrenal issues, it's going to disrupt your overall circadian rhythm. And so I talk about this every day with patients. Cortisol should be nice and high in the morning and then fall throughout the day. And so you should have pretty ample cortisol that helps get you out of bed. And then by the time the evening time comes along, it goes down. And for our listeners who maybe this is something new that they're looking into and don't even know what cortisol is our longer term stress hormone. It's kind of like the main long-term survival stress hormone. So if you're starving, if you are under some sort of chronic stress as opposed to very immediate fight or flight, that's the hormone that'll kick in to mobilize blood sugar, increase heart rate, blood pressure, all of those things, and stimulate the nervous system so you're on edge a little bit more, to be more aware of your surroundings and more alert to respond to things. And so if, knowing what that is, if for some reason you've got lower cortisol in the morning and it's higher later in the evening, if it's higher, you're going to be stressed, you're going to be alert, you're not going to fall asleep. Now, there are other biochemical mechanisms that are in play along with GABA, like you mentioned before, and some other issues that we're going to talk about in a little bit. But all in all, if you do not have a proper adrenal rhythm throughout the day, you're going to end up having issues with sleep. Now, adrenal fatigue is a term that a lot of people use where there's a couple different stages of, where your adrenals lie and the, I guess, work that they're getting put through and the level of ability to keep up with that work demand that they have left. And so think of your adrenals like a battery. If you're nice and rested, your body's happy, you're not really stressed, your battery is going to be nice and full. But if you're undergoing chronic stress for way too long, your battery will drain. And at some point you're going to get where I use like a washcloth as an analogy. So say you've got a washcloth that's, really full of water. If you squeeze it even just a little bit, cortisol is going to come out. And that's what it's like when it's a full battery. However, later stage adrenal fatigue, what'll happen is think of it like it's mostly dry. But if you really, really torque on it, you might get a little bit of stuff that comes out. And so your body will basically reserve cortisol in that case for some extreme circumstance. And throughout the day or throughout the night, sometimes you'll get these little bits of cortisol that are produced in response to low blood sugar, or maybe even, psychological component of it where you're having dreams about work or life or your stressors. You're going to get a little bit of a surge and it'll throw sleep off. And so, end of story. All that really goes into it is some sort of excess cortisol demand for way too long, leading to the adrenals not being optimized with that normal rhythm throughout the day. There are metabolic issues that will contribute. There are psychological things, emotional things that will contribute. There are pain things. There's inflammation. I mean, anything that's going to drive your nervous system into overdrive is going to upregulate cortisol production and lead to this being a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And that conversation with the adrenals, that could be its own episode in general when it comes to sleep, because there's so much to talk about. And we have had episodes on cortisol and cortisol tolerance and how much stress you can handle and all the different things you mentioned. If your body's in fight or flight, if your body's in survival mode, your increased cortisol in your system is just going to make it hard for your body to actually be able to fall asleep at night and to sleep well through the night. And then, some people will wake up in the middle of the night or earlier than they should with like a cortisol dump where they wake up and they're just so awake and they can't sleep longer. That's a little bit of a different issue. That usually goes back to your liver not being able to regulate your blood sugar and maintain your blood sugar. So blood sugar drops, cortisol spikes, like you talked about. And so, yeah, managing your autonomic nervous system, reducing stress, all that's extremely, extremely helpful. In general, I'll give 2 points here, and then there's a couple other topics here we need to talk about. But when it comes to cortisol and the adrenal glands, 2 things to realize. One is there's things that are kind of external, which is stress from work, stress from relationships, stress from family, stress from life. And then there's the internal things, which is if you have some kind of chronic gut imbalance, if you have some kind of chronic inflammation, that's going to automatically increase your cortisol to where instead of your cortisol naturally being at 0, and then it's worsened by work and life, your cortisol might start at, like, let's say, for example, 50. And then you have the stress of work and life on top of that. So just realizing that stress is something that can be mental. It's also something that can be chemical. And then it's also something that can come from more physical sources, like if you work out too much or if you don't work out or move your body enough. So that's awesome. Dr. Tim, when it comes to adrenal issues, what maybe like top 1 or 2 or 3 kind of recommendations for, like, hey, here's how you get cortisol kind of under control so that you can sleep better at night?
First things first, manage blood sugar effectively. That's always the thing that you have to do. So number 1, absolutely listen to some of our episodes that talk about metabolic health. So I believe our 2nd episode, stress and anxiety, really gets into optimizing blood sugar. So super important. So anytime blood sugar goes low, you're going to produce cortisol to bring things up, and that's going to contribute to fatiguing of the adrenals, draining of that battery, all sorts of problems, contributing to sleep issues.
That means more carbs, right?
Yes, nothing but carbs, only plant-based protein, lots of soy, red 40 through the roof.
Oh my
Red 40
word.
is phenomenal for sleep.
And get more shots, right?
Say it again.
I said, and get more shots, right?
Yes,
more shots,
exactly.
more drugs,
all the shots, both the injections and the alcohol. Those are all great for stuff. No, none
Guys,
of that's
this
good.
is all sarcasm.
All sarcasm. Yes, we're just having a little fun this morning.
So what I was saying was, I was saying more carbs. Dr. Tim, you just totally distracted yourself. I was saying more carbs, right? So you're saying sugar goes low, and most people think, like, hey, I need to eat some sugar, right?
No, don't do it. Your medical doctor will say, oh, just drink some orange juice. No. Things are going to spike and then crash again. You need to have protein and fat. You need a ribeye, have some just good meat or something like that. Meat stick, have a chomps, but those episodes talk about all that stuff. That's neither here or there for now. We got plenty to get to, but that's number 1. So that's kind of the overproduction side of things. Let's talk about the detoxification. So I guess top 2, it's inhibit overproduction of cortisol, which is going to be through managing blood sugar. And then from there, start working on detoxification. So there are 3 main hormone detox pathways in the liver that will clear out all of our steroid hormones like cortisol, insulin, testosterone, estrogens, all of the above. They are, it's not even worth getting into for now, but there are 3 pathways. Start working on providing your body with nutrients to get rid of those or support those. And that's things like artichoke extract, vitamin B6 in its active form, pyridoxal 5-phosphate, magnesium, all of your methylated B vitamins are helpful for that too. Cysteine, glutathione, glycine. I mean, there's a lot of different things on that list. And so those are going to be the top things, in my opinion, to help with the adrenals and supporting them in basically just allowing them to relax. They're going to become more active the more that you're producing things, and then they're going to become more active if you are not detoxifying things well. So cortisol is a positive feedback loop until it just can't keep up anymore. So those are my top things. What else would you like to throw in there, Dr. Joel?
Yeah, so important regulating stress throughout the day. So getting enough protein and fats for maintaining your blood sugar. We talk about 3 meals, no snacking between, the whole thing. Other things that can really help with kind of cortisol stress throughout the day. So ashwagandha can be super helpful for people. Sometimes rhodiola can be really, really helpful. Of course, kind of depending on the person. Magnesium, there's different types of magnesium. I would in general say magnesium calm, which is a powder, tends to be really, really good for people. And then also maybe even if you still have issues with magnesium calm, maybe add in some magnesium glycinate. That can be super, super helpful. And then honestly, I would say when people get those things, that takes out probably 85% of issues there. And then the rest of it's figuring out like, hey, where else could cortisol be coming from in your body? If you have a lot of inflammation, maybe you need to, focus on eating whole foods, avoiding processed foods, preservatives, avoiding seed oils, avoiding too much dairy, too much gluten, stuff like that. So yeah, top pieces, I'd say protein, healthy fats like grass-fed butter, olive oil, eggs, stuff like that. And then when it comes to some of the other cortisol stuff, ashwagandha, magnesium, and really just kind of digging into like, hey, where else might inflammation be coming from, stuff like that. So that's kind of how I would wrap some of that up.
Gotcha. Well, that kind of wraps that point up. I don't think we need to spend too much time on the next topic, genitourinary issues, but let's touch on that briefly. So, sure. With falling asleep, everybody's had nights where they just can't fall asleep. It's not like it's just, patients that come into the office. Everybody has experienced that. And so it's, your mind is racing, you feel kind of stressed, maybe you're uncomfortable and in pain, but, sometimes you just gotta pee, and you just keep going. Is it that you drink too much water? Is it that you're dehydrated? Is there's some sort of infection or inflammation or histamine going on there? A lot of times stuff like that can come into play. So I've had plenty of patients where they've got some sort of food sensitivity that contributes to overall just histamine intolerance. And then from there, the bladder just falls victim to histamines very, very, very easily. And so they won't be able to fall asleep easily because they just have to keep getting up to go to the bathroom because their bladder is just super sensitive. A lot of times patients will experience things when they have some sort of UTI or something like that that's throwing things off in that area. Kidney stones, anything that's going to cause excess urination can contribute to sleep issues. And I don't think anybody's, a complete stranger to that because, everybody's probably had a day where they're outside doing stuff, or when they were a kid, they were, sweating like crazy out in the sun, and they came in and just drank a bunch of water before going to bed. And then all of a sudden you're like, man, I gotta pee like 10 times before I can fall asleep. But it's not like it's not just a water equation. There are underlying inflammatory things that can contribute to that as well. And so, I guess maybe paying attention to things like what you're eating, maybe some certain habits, other symptoms might go along with it, like potentially burning with urination, maybe some lower abdominal cramping or discomfort, things like that could be involved with genitourinary issues. So,
Yep.
Anyway, Dr. Joel, anything else to add to that, or would you like to just jump into the next topic?
No, yeah, that's great. That's great. Let's jump into this neurotransmitter dysfunction. So I mentioned GABA a little bit earlier, right? So that's the brain hormone that's going to help calm the brain. One of the things, Dr. Tim, that you touched on, you went over really fast, and we need to emphasize this. You mentioned how melatonin can be low if serotonin is low. Most people don't realize this. Two facts here. Number one, serotonin is the precursor to melatonin. But so serotonin, the brain hormone that helps with mood and things like that, turns into melatonin. So if you have issues with sleep, I would argue melatonin is not necessarily the hormone that's going to necessarily help you fall asleep as much as it will help you stay asleep and get into a deep sleep. If you have issues there, you might have issues with serotonin. And most people don't know this, but the second fact is that serotonin, roughly 99%, they say, is made in your gut health. And so the majority of the time where I see people have sleep issues, a lot of times it comes from their gut health. But in the same way with GABA, for example, like the number one thing that one of the biggest takeaways I share with people that have issues falling asleep is if you have an issue falling asleep, maybe your mind is racing or your body almost just seems kind of restless in that way. Oftentimes the problem is low GABA, but the GABA is low because of an ammonia toxicity. So ammonia, again, is a toxin byproduct that comes off of things like parasites, bacteria, and fungus. which means that, yes, you probably need a nutrient to detox that, but the root of the issue is probably stemming from your gut health. And we know that up to 30% of GABA in our body in general comes from our gut health. And so very quickly, as many people say, a lot of everything goes back to your gut health. Very quickly, that tends to be part of the story here with falling asleep as well. So I would say in general, just remembering that like melatonin, of course, is important for sleep, but a lot of that comes from serotonin. And then also realizing like GABA is super important. Some of it comes from your gut, but then a lot of it is just simply disrupted ultimately because of ammonia toxicity, which we need to detox with supplements. And then, that usually comes from infections, which we need to address. So Dr. Tim, anything else that you want to add there, or any little areas that you want to go in a little bit deeper there?
Well, one of the most important things I think that we need to talk about with serotonin is SSRI medications.
Yeah.
So, yeah, a lot of times, or I would argue every time, within the most reasonable degree that we can, there is some sort of microbiome imbalance contributing to downregulation of serotonin production in the cells that line the gut. And then therefore inhibiting serotonin production. So with that being said, that's always the precursor to a need, quote, need for SSRI medications, anxiety, depressive disorders, all of those things. And so if we know that melatonin is very calming, if we know that GABA is very calming, if the cells that line the gut are not producing those things, you're going to be more ramped up, you're going to be more anxious, you're going to be less happy, and you're going to have issues of sleep, but also mood, all of the above. So once you start taking SSRI medications, what's going to happen is over time, you're going to get a slow buildup of serotonin and therefore of melatonin as well, because serotonin must be cleared or converted to melatonin. It can be detoxified through another pathway, but a lot of it does go through to melatonin. So anyway, with that being said, you go from having low because of the gut, and then you'll at some point cross over that threshold for things being normal, and then very quickly you can get it into where things will become high, and that's where we call that serotonin syndrome. Now, serotonin syndrome actually, I would argue, mirrors symptoms of low serotonin. So basically, low serotonin or high serotonin can have very similar symptoms, where you're kind of depressed feeling, not really much motivation, just not happy, can't sleep, all of the above, can't go to the bathroom, all of those things could very well be involved. Now, same thing happens with melatonin. Your body almost becomes resistant to it. And so, like you said previously, you shouldn't be taking a melatonin supplement. And so maybe you have other reasons for that, but I would bet one of the reasons is your body becomes resistant to it and it won't produce its own at some point. And so melatonin is a hormone, so you don't want to introduce too much of that. But anyway, with that being said, the SSRI medications, things like that, can really throw this stuff off, because if you have an issue producing these things in the first place, taking those medications is not going to upregulate your own production of them. It's just not. It's just going to keep you from breaking down the tiny little bit that you're making in your brain and other locations than just the gut where most of it is made. And when that's the case, it's just kind of a Band-Aid. I'll have phone consultations with people, or, just chat with people in the office, and they'll be like, well, I'm on this medication, I'm on this, I'm on that. Is this going to mess with things? And I'm like, yeah, a little bit, but the main thing that I really try to emphasize with patients is the importance of informed consent. If you are not completely understanding of the risks, benefits, alternatives to any of the care that you are provided and things that you are recommended or prescribed, then you are not properly informed and you cannot properly consent to that. I can't tell you how many patients I've had that they are like, yeah, my doctor just put me on, levothyroxine, 25 years ago, and I've just been on it since. And I'm like, okay, well, what kind of thyroid issue do you have? I don't know. They just said my thyroid's bad. Is it hypo? Is it hyper? I don't know. They just told me it's bad. It's like, so you basically are just taking something because somebody told you to. And that's not, I'm not blaming patients for that, because, you should be able to trust your doctor and know that everything's in your right interest. But to understand that medications can cause downstream effects other than their desired goal, and those things can be pretty significant, is necessary, and knowing that neurotransmitters can be seriously disrupted by taking these things, and greatly affect sleep for the sake of this episode is super important to know. So if you are on those things, your gut is always, always, always going to be the underlying cause for that. And you have to get things balanced and get those cells moving again so they can start making that stuff on your own. So
Yeah.
anyway, that's my
Awesome.
soapbox when it
I
comes
love
to
it.
neurotransmitters and SSRIs. But
I
it's
love it.
an important public service announcement. Inform yourself on that stuff.
That's good. That's good. Dr. Tim, we need to talk about sleep hygiene. We need to talk about practical things people can take away from this to help. But I wanted to touch on the gut stuff, just one last piece here, and mention, yes, we have episodes on gut health. Yes, those would be good to listen to. But if you're new to our podcast, you're new to holistic health, the gist of gut health is you can have inflammation from eating things that are not good for us, whether that's processed foods or seed oils or whatever it is. And then you can also have infections in the gut, things like bacterial overgrowth issues, bacterial infections, fungal or yeast issues, parasites. So when we talk about those, when we talk about the gut health, talk about having gut issues, a lot of times that's what we're talking about. And just wanted to mention that in case somebody's new to this, is, again, because most doctors don't talk about those things. So again, we get into all those things way more in depth in other episodes, but for here and now, we'll kind of keep it in on target here with the sleep. So sleep hygiene, Dr. Tim, let's walk through this. And then of course, talk through like, hey, what would our recommendations be? We'll kind of do like a big summary of what we would recommend here. So number one with sleep hygiene, one of the big things I like to talk about is like when you eat dinner, when is your last meal? I would argue for the best sleep, you want to eat dinner 3 to 4 hours before bed. I would say the best sleep 3 to 4 hours before bed. Can you get away with eating 2 hours before bed or even sometimes 1 hour? Yeah, probably, but it's not necessarily going to be the best sleep. I would say 3 hours, at least maybe 4 hours before bed is definitely ideal. Dr. Tim, do you follow that kind of same line of thought there?
I would be hypocritical if I did. My wife and I, we do not eat until probably 8 or 9 o'clock at night sometimes.
That doesn't mean you get that. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're. It means that you might not be practicing what you preach.
Correct. Yeah, I know.
Which there's a time and place for all that, for sure.
I somewhat agree. So I guess my rebuttal to that would be, following the whole dysglycemia diet thing. If we're trying to properly enforce our circadian rhythm, and that proper cortisol rhythm throughout the day, we always talk about, 3 meals a day, 5 hours apart or so, getting enough protein and fat in our meals, all this stuff. But, every time that you get up to about that 5 hour mark after you eat, blood sugar is going to start, creeping down, and then it's going to be time to eat again. And yes, you should be able to support yourself throughout the night without utilizing cortisol to regulate things. But if you are pushing, say that gap between dinner and breakfast is way too long, you're going to then produce some cortisol to regulate things. And so if an earlier dinner means that breakfast ends up being, of course, earlier, but I guess what am I getting at here? So if dinner is earlier, inherently you're waiting to go to sleep, breakfast is going to be further away from that. And so you may get where cortisol dips down. I'm sorry, blood sugar dips down, cortisol kicks in, wakes you up later on in like early hours of the morning.
Yeah.
Whereas we are eating later at night, and therefore blood sugar is better sustained throughout the night as a result. I
Yeah.
could kind of argue that point. I personally don't find that it causes us any issues. But for the sake of, say you're not regulating blood sugar appropriately and you're eating too many carbs, things like that,
Yep.
yes, that could also be a thing. We
Yep.
could also argue about the whole migrating motor complex and the cleansing of the gut, neurotransmitter production, all of that being better if you eat earlier before bedtime. At the end of the day, whatever timing, here's, I guess, my most practical way that I can put it. Whatever timing works out best for you and when you're timing your meals throughout the day to reinforce a proper circadian rhythm, I think is best for you. We are very not awesome at that lately, because we'll eat lunch at, noon, 1 o'clock, and then it'll be later before we eat dinner. But
Yeah.
once we get home from work, we're buzzing around doing all kinds of stuff around the house, trying to get our house ready for, our baby that's
Yeah.
coming and all the stuff. And so it just falls to the wayside. Um, and so not the greatest, but at the same time, if lunch is later for you, then dinner should also be a little later, just kind of all depends
Yeah.
person to person.
Yeah, I definitely say there's a balance. Dr. Tim, I think in general, how I would advise patients is like, if you eat dinner sooner, let's say you eat at like 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, something like that, or way earlier than probably a lot of people do. I would say as long as you have enough protein and healthy fats in your diet, the blood sugar should be fine for a while. Um, there's also kind of a counter argument of like in regards to eating later. And I think this is the main issue with eating later, closer to bed, is generally when you eat, your insulin will spike. Now, a lot of that depends on what you eat, for sure. So like you said, you eat more carbs closer to bed, you're going to spike your insulin. That's going to mess with your sleep. If you eat like just protein before bed, and sometimes that really helps people actually to fall asleep, is eating protein before bed, or even eating like some healthy fats like grass-fed butter before bed. Sometimes that can really, really help people. Dr. Tim, next piece here. One thing I like to share with patients is like, hey, be careful taking the supplements right before bed. Sometimes people might miss a dose or so throughout the day, and they're like, oh, let me just get these in right before bed. Sometimes the supplements take a little bit of time to kind of settle in your system, from what I've found. And so if you swallow them and then you try to go to sleep, sometimes it's your body's not the most relaxed in that way. With sleep hygiene, of course, we talk about screen time, blue light exposure. You talked about the pineal gland making melatonin, and most people have heard this at least once. But blue light coming from our screens, coming from our fluorescent lights, things like that, they're going to suppress melatonin production, and then it's going to mess with our sleep. And so, essentially, what you want to do is you want to protect the eyes. You want to use more natural, like amber lights, as best as you can in your house. And then, of course, an hour before bed, really be careful of like, hey, watching a lot of TV, watching some, scrolling on your phone with all that blue light. You want to use more of like a red light filter and stuff like that to try to protect the eyes. And then we've got physical activity, as well as, sleep in general, blankets, dark room, fan, all those different things. So in general, with physical activity, just be careful doing too much too close to bed. Sometimes that can kind of increase cortisol and almost wire your system before bed. And then in general with sleep, heavy blankets tend to help. Being in a dark room is super important, again, for that light regulation. And then sometimes having even a fan on or some white noise in the back can be really helpful with things as well. Dr. Tim kind of flew through that. A lot of people have heard that stuff before, but just want to re-emphasize some of that. Anything else to add, Dr. Tim, in general to the sleep hygiene conversation? Otherwise, let's jump into like, hey, what are our kind of big recommendations or takeaways for basically helping people to just be able to fall asleep better?
The last thing with sleep hygiene is consistency. Develop a routine.
That's good.
If you're going to shower before bed or, read before bed, finding some sort of consistent schedule has been very beneficial for a lot of people. So
Love it.
anyway, I would just encourage that. But I guess the last point that we got to get to here, I'm sorry, this is
Yeah.
that
So
was the
basically,
last
big
thing that we have put out.
takeaways. Big
Oh,
takeaways.
big takeaways.
Yeah.
From this episode, big takeaways is, I guess, practical for what you can do at home. Let's break it down to that. What are things that you can start to implement from home versus what are things that maybe you have to seek out some help for? So first things first is being aware of the circumstances that you're dealing with based off of medications, maybe some health issues, things like that. Because if you're on SSRIs or on some sort of sleep aid, things like that are going to throw things off biochemically in your body. So being aware that that's influencing things, and understanding that, some of these recommendations may not be as significant to you in the short term to apply at home because things are just off biochemically due to medications. That's one thing. Now, what you can do is start to implement some of the lifestyle habits. So making sure that you're eating properly. I would encourage our listeners to listen to episode 2, the stress and anxiety and stress episode to just listen to how to eat properly to regulate blood sugar effectively. Maybe listen to some of our hormone episodes to listen to how to detoxify hormones and start getting the liver clearing things out better. And then from there, develop some sort of routine, some sort of habit with going to bed. So, wake up at a good time, get going with your day. Don't overload on caffeine, things like that. Manage your blood sugar effectively. And then from there, come bedtime, like Dr. Joel said, limit screen time, limit blue light, all of those things. Maybe take the time to read under some red light, allow your body to actually relax into going to bed. And that's gonna honestly make a big difference. I've had a lot of patients who they're like, I can't sleep. And I'm like, well, what are you doing before bed? Well, I'm on my phone, scrolling TikTok, my phone's right in front of my face. And I'm like, well, duh. You got blue light right in front of your face.
Totally.
That's what awakens your pineal gland and tells you it's time
Yep.
to get up. So I always like to relate things to almost like primitive or like historical times. Back in the log cabin days, the pioneers moving west, they didn't have blue light in the evening. Once the sun went down, you either, you had a candle or you had a campfire or something like that, your
Which is
fireplace that you were
calming.
sitting in front of. I'm sorry, say it again.
Which is, sorry, I was saying which is calming. The red lights, the
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So all of the, I guess, more natural forms of light are more calming. And so,
yeah,
you can obviously get glasses and stuff now that are, blue light filter and everything. But I mean, back in the day, people just didn't have all the technology and all the stuff that we have these days that are throwing things off. So if there's one way to frame your thoughts is minimalism and thinking almost like primitively or historically. What were humans doing for hundreds of thousands of years for, however much of history, without cell phones, without LED lighting, without all that stuff, we were eating real food. We were waking up when the sun came up, going to sleep when the sun came down, all that. So our rhythms were a bit more natural than they are now. So get rid of the excess and it should help things.
yeah, awesome. And the last few things that I'll mention there as well is, we kind of mentioned some things throughout this episode, but basically managing and handling cortisol, so stress. So, things that really help with that is taking some time in the evening to kind of unwind. Different supplements like magnesium, like I said, magnesium calm, 1 teaspoon, maybe an hour before bed is usually really helpful for people. If that's helpful, but maybe you need more help, maybe try adding in a little bit of magnesium glycinate. I like pure encapsulations, magnesium glycinate. You take 1 capsule or maybe 2 capsules in addition to the magnesium calm, and that can usually be very helpful for people. And then, the other main thing is like ashwagandha, taking 2 capsules. You can do that in the morning or in the evening. If you tend to have higher stress anyways, you might try 2 capsules morning and night. I like Supreme Nutrition's ashwagandha for that. And then, getting adequate protein throughout the day and adequate fats. If you do all those things right, you do the sleep hygiene right, and you still have issues falling asleep. Maybe your system feels wired. Maybe it just feels like it's in this like excess, like active mode. Generally, then you want to consider deeper root cause issues, things like chronic infections, chronic inflammation, and stuff like that. And I usually find when people do all the basics right, add in a couple basic supplements, most people, like I said, they do really well falling asleep, where they'll, instead of taking 40 minutes to fall asleep, it takes 10 minutes to fall asleep. And of course, that can be a process that, like you said, Dr. Tim, as you give your body a schedule and a routine, your body kind of starts to know it's time to go to bed. And that 40 minutes, like we said, goes closer to 10 minutes, and that 10 minutes even gets faster to 5 minutes and that kind of thing. So, Dr. Tim, I think this has been helpful. I think this has been good. Hopefully for our listeners, it has been as well. For our listeners, if you guys have any questions on this stuff, please reach out to us. We'd be happy to help and answer any questions. For myself, the practice here is called Freedom Health and Wellness. We're in Flower Mound, Texas, in the DFW area. You can find us online at drjoelmiller.com. Feel free to email us or reach out via phone. We'd be happy to help you with any questions you have, if you need guidance, or if you actually need help with something health-wise. I would be happy to help. And then lastly, if you guys have any suggestions for topics, we'd be happy to consider those, and just get in contact with us and send us over those suggestions. Dr. Tim, for yourself, how can people find you?
So I'm Dr. Tim Augustiniak here at Flourish Functional Wellness Center in Bentonville, Arkansas. You can find us online at draugustiniak.com or flourishfwc.com. We have links to all the socials as well as all the contact info for the office on there. So if you have any questions, comments, concerns, or suggestions for future episodes, feel free to reach out and let us know. Thanks everybody for listening today. Hope you guys got something useful out of it, and we will see you in the next one.